The next item on our agenda is to discuss our master plan review. Mr. Phillips, you want to bring us up to date on that and what you folks on TCC have done
Sure.
and what your suggestions are for proceeding?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I think as we discussed at the last meeting, just again to refresh everyone's memory, the municipal land use statute in New Jersey requires that a municipality undertake a re-examination of its master plan every 10 years. And up until, I think, 3 years ago, it used to be every 6 years, but the legislation changed that to every 10 years. And it really is important that a municipality undertake that re-examination because there's now a statement in the MLUL which says that if you don't, there's a rebuttable presumption that your zoning remains basically valid. In other words, not arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable or subject to someone challenging your zoning. So it's very important that a municipality basically comply with the mandate in the statute. And just to bring you up to speed, the last sort of full comprehensive master plan that was done for the township, believe it or not, dates back to 1994. And that would be a document that deals with all the mandatory and optional elements that go into a master plan. Land use, housing elements, circulation plan, open space. The last comprehensive was back in 1994. There were a series of re-examinations done to meet what was then, again, the 6-year requirement. There was one in, I think, 2000 and also 2000, it stretched to 2001. I think there was an amendment. And then there was one undertaken in 2007, which again is the 6-year period. And now, just do the math, it's 2017. So we really need to basically prepare this document as we move forward. So I believe that the board members now have a copy of the 2007 document. I think, Jim, you arranged to have that sent to all the board members, I think, on the end of last week. Obviously, at least I don't think you've all digested the document, at least at this point. But a couple of things, and then Mr. Shimon, I'll go through what the TCC has done and how we would like to proceed on this process, because it's certainly not going to be done in 1 meeting or 2 meetings or 3 meetings. But I think the key, if you want to follow along to the document, if you just go to page 2. And page 2 of the document basically lists in 5 bullet points the statutory requirements in terms of what must be part of the contents of the re-examination report. So the first bullet is that the major problems, goals, objectives, land use policies that were set in place at the time of the last re-examination report basically have to be restated. It's a requirement of the document. The second bullet is the document must address the extent to which these objectives, goals, policies, issues, problems have been either reduced or increased or stayed the same in the intervening 10-year period. Then the third bullet is you've got to basically state the extent to which there have been changes in these assumptions, policies, and so on, which form the basis for the last master plan document and presumably form the basis for your current development regulations. And again, they're saying with particular regard to land use, housing, circulation, and so forth, again, following the both the mandatory and optional elements in the municipal land use statute. And then the fourth bullet is really sort of the meat, if you will, of a re-examination. And that is that the planning board will basically identify the specific recommendations in terms of changes to the master plan and or recommended changes to the development regulations, basically which would go to the governing body. And it would also include any of the underlying objectives, policies that would go hand in hand with those new plan amendments and or development regulation changes that are being recommended. And then lastly, because redevelopment has become so prevalent in New Jersey, this is also an amendment to the statute that probably didn't exist at the time you were doing some of the predecessor documents that I mentioned, is the recommendations of the board concerning the incorporation of redevelopment plans. And as you are well aware, there are now two possible, an area in need of redevelopment that you set forth for the Atlantic Health System property on Mendham Road, although there's no plan in place. And you've also just recently made a recommendation, and the governing body basically approved a redevelopment area designation for the Colgate site, and you will be basically moving forth the planning board in preparing a redevelopment plan. So that last bullet is very relevant in terms of the re-examination report. So
just a correction, not amendment of the...
Mount Campbell, I'm sorry. What we did at the TCC is we spent probably a couple of hours at one of the meetings, Jim, and we actually went through the document. And what we did is we kind of went through the stated objectives, goals, and based on our knowledge, and probably more Jim's than mine, because I wasn't around at the time of the 2007 document, we had indicated what was still relevant in our minds, well, what we thought was a changed assumption, what we thought were issues and recommendations that had been addressed in the intervening period, and we just jotted notes on that. And then we basically decided before we go any further, because basically we serve as your advisors, this is your document, not our document, that we would basically have an initial meeting with you, and what we thought, again, subject to your discretion, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the board, is that we would sort of relatively quickly go through these sections of the document where we have to restate, we have to see to what extent there have been changes, because again, we didn't want to be presumptuous and to do that, and we wanted to include the board in that process. So that's kind of where we are, Mr. Chairman, as we sit here this evening.
Okay.
Jim, is that accurate?
Yeah, no, I would say that was good. And one thing I wanted to mention is, there's two items on for discussion tonight, and I'm not sure how late the board wanted to go. I was thinking 10-ish, but I mean, that's up to you guys. I'm not sure how far we'll get through with the master plan stuff, but then we also have some closed session discussions we have to go through with the planning board. There's been some decisions, maybe you've read some of the stuff with the courts related to COED and the gap period, and it has the potential to affect our affordable housing plan. So, that's something we figured that we probably would split the time between those periods, so we have a cutoff time to go into the closed session.
So you're recommending about 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock was when I wanted to go home, not switch to the closed session, so just for clarification on that. But I don't know, if you guys want to go to midnight,
I would second
God
that
bless
motion.
you. After a while, it starts to, you start to glaze over on this stuff. So I figured half of that time, if we did an hour and a half, on the master plan, and then, it gives us an hour or hour and a half, whatever we need for going through the closed session stuff, because I anticipate there's going to be questions.
Mr. Phillips, you figure we need about an hour or so on the call?
Yeah, I think that if the 10 o'clock is, acceptable to everyone, I would probably go to 9 on the master plan and then leave an hour for the closed session.
Okay.
It could take some time.
Okay. And I had a question for you. As you know, the master plan in 2007 was amended and then adopted in 2009, but that doesn't necessarily extend the 10-year period, does it, or does it?
Well, it's an interesting question that we raised at the TCC, and it's very apropos that Learning Council just came in at that point. We raised that, and in fact, I raised it, and I think, I don't want to speak for Steve, but I think being the cautious Learning Council that he was, I think his opinion was that we should treat it as if it's 2007. As opposed to the 2009. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Section 89 requires a full re-examination, and I thought it prudent that we not consider a subsequent amendment to have taken the place of that full re-examination, and rather treat it as we are in our in several months, we'll hit the 10-year mark, pursuant to Section 89 of the MLUL. It's my opinion we should have the reexamination report completed by that point if we can.
Adopted by August?
Correct. August 20th, to be precise.
Okay. So that's our goal. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, Mr. Warner. Are we at the point where we are just doing yet another re-examination? I mean, does it reach the point where you just re-examine the old document so many times that you would just recommend a complete rewrite? Or does it just go on as additional re-examinations?
From the legal standpoint, statutorily, the reexamination should take place every 10 years. Depending upon the outcome of that reexamination, a determination could be made as a result of the report that no change is necessary, or that elements should be amended. It's
Or
all
could be a new master plan?
Or a new master plan, it's in its entirety. It all depends. So really, the reexamination is a good vehicle for making that determination, and that's, I think, part of the legislative intent behind it.
No, that's right on. I've seen documents, in fact, I've been involved in documents where we undertook a reexamination, and one of the recommendations of the reexamination was that we needed a complete redoing of the majority of the elements of the master plan. And then we subsequently, over the course of, once the reexamination was adopted, we actually worked on those particular amendments. In some cases, a reexamination will also, as part of the reexamination, will treat certain elements at the same time as the reexamination. So put land use element changes, circulation element changes and recommendations. It can be done either way. So that all those options, Louise, are open to the board.
Okay, so we just don't know yet. We don't have enough information. Okay, thank you.
And that's what the report's all about. And the process that we go through for the report is very different than a process of actually amending. So if out of the report it's decided that we really should do some amendments, then it becomes a whole different process, which is also statutorily defined or whatever, and exactly what that
It's
process
Section
is.
28 of the MLUL, to be precise, and it brings in Section 10.3 with respect to notice and public opportunity to be heard, comment, etc.
If we were to amend it.
If there's an amendment of any or all of the elements of the master plan or the adoption wholesale of the new one, correct.
Right. Whereas the report is really just a board activity, re-examining that. Okay. So, Mr. Phillips?
Okay, so is it acceptable, Mr. Chairman, to just go along through the document and have a give and take with the board, and Jim and I can share some of our thoughts, and then we would get your thoughts as we move this along.
And what might come out of this is certain areas that we ask you to go back and focus on and do some more research
Yep,
on.
and we fully anticipated that when the TCC met.
I want to ask one question. Am I correct in assuming that probably the Colgate property is one of the major parts of this reexamination? Because it's a major piece of property on a major street, and we haven't dealt with something like that in 10 years ago.
Well, I would agree that Colgate, in terms of changes in land use, in this case, it would presumably a redevelopment plan amendment, which the statute provides for as part of a reexamination, that we will certainly be addressing the redevelopment of the Colgate site.
Yeah, it seems to me that that will be a major part of this whole reexamination.
Phillips?
Okay, so Jim, I think we should probably start on page 3.